У нас пенсії будуть, у них немає. У нас піклування під дітей, під людей, під пенсіонерів, під дітей буде, у них немає. У нас діти підуть до школи, до дитячих садків, у них вони будуть сидіти в підвалах, бо вони нічого не вміють робити. І так, і саме так ми виграємо цю війну.
The Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky was a comedian. He was not an actor, he was a comedian. He only played in one show, The Star. And that's because a simple reason, Igor Kolomoisky. He financed the campaign after the Maidan revolution. There were only two options, vote Yanukovych again, which was impossible. The whole revolution was about the whole revolution was about to kick him out of his office, so Kolomoisky had to find a replacement. He talked with every member of the Ukrainian Rada, and he favored the members who were interested in Ukrainian National Socialistic Battalion and Nazi battalions. The member of the Rada who had the most contacts to the famous Aidar Battalion, Azov Battalion, Dnieper Battalion, and the party of the right sector, he actually invested in them. He spent them several $1 million, which they used to buy weapons, which is quite ironically. And he found him, they talked, he shared his contacts with him. Kolomoisky invested in the battalions because they feared an uprising after the Maidan revolution. There was already an uprising, an anti-Maidan movement in Crimea and in Donbass, which was struck down. All demonstrations against Maidan were brutally struck down by the Ukrainian police forces, which is not mentioned anywhere in Western media, of course. So we had found Poroshenko, and I will talk about him in another video. But why had he to replace him? Poroshenko was a nice puppet. He would never do such a vicious act as Zelensky and even kick his master out of the country. That will he never do. Basically because Poroshenko was too rich. He has too much power. He wanted to nationalize the main company of Kolomoisky, and that he couldn't accept. He was a good puppet. He shelled Donbass. He crushed every bit of resistance. He murdered every armed group which resisted the Ukrainian illegal government, and he completely destroyed the infrastructure of Crimea. He stole the waters from Crimea. He made a systematic change. That means Eastern Ukrainians become no money. They become such little money. They can only pay rarely for eating, and the Western Ukrainians get richer and richer, and the Eastern Ukrainians get poorer and poorer and resist against it and try to make an independent state out of Eastern Ukraine to avoid getting fucking starved to death, to make a second Holodomor. And what did Western Ukraine do? They brutally struck them. They brutally crushed them with the military and killed tens of thousands of people, a couple thousand armed civilians, but most of them were not even fighting. just ordinary civilians struck by Ukrainian shelling or Ukrainian invasion in cities. That did Poroshenko do. He was a good puppet, but he tried to bite the hand who feeds him, and that is exactly what Zelensky did after. But Zelensky had full control of the media, and Zelensky did the same thing that Poroshenko did, but he did it better because he had full control of the media. He just. I talk about it later. So Poroshenko tried to nationalize the bank of Kolomoisky, which financed his complete campaign, and the bank was favored by the United States. The United States actually donated hundreds of millions of dollars to the bank after the Maidan Revolution. Of course, because they supported the European Western expansions of Ukraine, but in reality they just wanted to make sure that a guy like Yanukovych couldn't be president in Ukraine again. Eastern Ukrainian president will we never see again. We need a rich oligarch in the power, a Western Ukrainian, not the Eastern Ukrainian, which suppresses brutally any kind of independence in the eastern part of Ukraine. And that just happened. Poroshenko was president, but he bit the hand who feeds him, and Igor Kolomoisky decided to start a massive propaganda campaign. He and the biggest oil company in Ukraine launched the series Servant of the People, which Zelensky is famous for. And it wasn't a coincidence that in the series he praised a president of Ukraine who gets into the European Union, which was the wish of the ordinary citizens who took part in the Maidan Revolution. 90% of them were armed militants of the right sector organization. But so he gained the support of the ordinary people, and with this massive propaganda campaign, and Igor Kolomoisky controls the media in Ukraine, it was aired 24/7. It's no coincidence that Zelensky replaced Poroshenko. Many Eastern Ukrainians thought they will now live in peace, no shelling anymore. They made actually a peace agreement with the East Ukrainian separatists and the Ukrainian army. But he gained the support. He immediately gained the support of the battalions. He met in Kiev with representatives of Azov, of Aidar, of the Dnieper, of the Georgian Legion. Actually, the Georgian Legion actually was in Ukraine before the Russian invasion, and they met, and he made peace. He gained the support of all these nationalist battalions, but that wasn't publicly stated. Only private, small media outlets mentioned this, and no one listens to them. So many Eastern Europeans thought, yes, we could live in peace now. There will be no Ukrainian attacks anymore. And Russia, which has actually talked with Poroshenko every single month after he launched attacks on Eastern Ukraine, they try to make peace. They try to make peace every single month. But Poroshenko broke. They made actually an pact about this. He promised he wouldn't attack Eastern Ukraine anymore and would accept would recognize the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. He promised this, but he just said in an interview that he only made the pact to buy time, and after 6 weeks after the pact, he launched new attacks on eastern Ukraine, even though the East Ukrainians had trusted him. And yeah, it's quite ironically that people trusted him. Everyone was pissed of him. Even Western leaders did not like him even. And yes, Ukraine needed a president with the West, with the support of the West, a president who could make solid propaganda, who is a great who can speak big, who can manipulate everyone, who can get the support of Western countries. And they found a young man who is an actor and comedian, who has great contacts to oligarchs and nationalist battalions, and so they made him to president and let him replace Poroshenko. And he actually met with Putin to discuss the situation in eastern Ukraine. He actually met with him and said he is gonna make, I quote, the eastern Ukrainians are Ukrainians. They're not different, they're not subhuman, and every eastern Ukrainian should live the same lifestyle as in western Ukrainian. And we should abolish all conflicts and differences the Petro Poroshenko established. That's what he promised. But in January 2024, Western aid arrived. Big Western weapon deployments arrived in Ukraine. For which purpose? The official statement was the purpose of these weapons is to secure Ukraine from separatist attacks. Which separatist attacks? He just announced he would make peace with them. He made a very tactical thing. He announced he wouldn't attack them and would make peace with them and sustain weapon silence, but he did not recognize them. That's just tactical. And when Western weapons arrived, he just fired everything they had: artillery, bombs, airstrikes with the Ukrainian Air Force. Russia delivered weapons, not heavy weapons. In 2016, 2017, the first time they delivered weapons, not heavy weapons, not tanks, anti-tank weapons, anti-drone weapons, and not humanitarian aid, and just normal artillery, grenades, all the stuff. They did not deliver MLRS, they did not deliver heavy weapons, they did not deliver book systems. Many of the weapons the DPR and LPR uses today are old Soviet and stolen Ukrainian systems because the stupid Yanukovych made a fucking mistake. He just stored 40% of the Ukrainian army storage in eastern Ukraine, and after the Maidan revolution and the breakup of the West and the East and the conflict arises, the armed battalions who were defending their home from Ukrainian invaders just stole all the Ukrainian equipment and used it against the Ukrainians who were attacking them. The most heavy shelling in the history of this conflict was in January 2022. And that's just the reason Russia invaded. If that not happened, Russia wouldn't have invaded. Over 25,000 people died and over 60,000 were injured. Estimates were made that 32,000 actually died. And the Georgian Legion raided a couple of villages, committed war crimes again. The Aidar battalions, the Dnieper Azov. They rised up in Mariupol. They captured Donetsk, and then we have this footage from the 29 January 2022. Ukrainian tanks drive through Donetsk center. Just ordinary people make street barrages, fire with throw grenades at tanks, and the tanks just fire at buildings. They fire at civilian buildings. And as everything is destroyed and only captured DPR soldiers lay on the ground, the Aidar, the Azov people can come and shoot them, torture them, rape women in the city, and then after that they just return to Western Ukraine. They did not destroy the entire army. The DPR and LPR armies retreated in villages behind the cities. They could have destroyed the entire DPR LPR army, but they didn't. That was a decision they made. So everyone who still says this was unprovoked, blah 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 blah, that's just bullshit. That's just bullshit. It's completely provoked. Zelensky and Poroshenko promised things they couldn't make. They killed tens of thousands of innocent civilians, and many say, yeah, but they have the right to do this. Donetsk and Lugansk is Ukraine. Crimea is Ukraine. It would be Ukraine without the Maidan revolution and without the suppression of the protests. That wouldn't have happened. They had a democratic president. They had a president who never would kill his own people. They had a president who would never be financed by some oligarchs. But what they did, they rised up and kicked him out of office and killed and tortured and murdered many of his parliament members and many of his advisors, and hundreds of policemen were killed actually, and civilians were not shot from the policemen. Civilians were shot by the protesters. If that's not a violent protest and pro-EU, not violent protest, I can't say what is. In the next episode, we are going to focus on what happened after. How did Zelensky actually fight this war? How he tried to repel the Russian invasion? Did he actually fight a good war? Fight a fair war? Just focus on the front line, not randomly shelled civilians hundreds of meters behind the front line. That is going to be covered in the next episode, and you will see it.
На моем запястье айс.